and welcome to Field Lab Earth, the podcast that's all about past and present advances in the fields of agronomic, crop, soil, and environmental sciences. Today we'll be talking to Dr. Scott Hutchins about sustainable agricultural programs in the United States and European Union. Government officials in both the United States and the European Union agree that sustainable agriculture is an important and necessary topic today. However, there are many and differing opinions on how to secure sustainability. Today, Dr. Hutchins will discuss two approaches proposed by these different regions: the U.S. Agriculture Innovation Agenda and the Farm to Fork Strategy in Europe, including their goals, their strategies to reach them, and how they can work together to help build a more sustainable world. I'm your host, Abby Morrison. Let's talk about science. Hi everyone, welcome to the show. Today we have Dr. Scott Hutchins with us. Scott is the former Deputy Undersecretary for the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Research, Education, and Economics Mission Area, which is comprised of the Agricultural Research Service, Economic Research Service, National Agricultural Statistics Service, the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, and the Office of the Chief Scientist. Together, these agencies have unique federal leadership responsibility to advance agricultural research, extension, and education. At the time of this recording, Dr. Hutchins was still active in his role as Deputy Undersecretary. A board-certified entomologist, Dr. Hutchins is a past president of the Entomological Society of America, ESA Fellow, and ESA Honorary Member. He received a bachelor's in entomology from Auburn University, master's in entomology from Mississippi State University, and PhD in entomology from Iowa State University. Dr. Hutchins' research focused on integrated pest management, particularly addressing the impact of insect-induced injury on crop physiology. Dr. Hutchins joined USDA after retiring from the private sector, where he served in various technical and leadership roles focused on agricultural innovation and technology development. Hi, Scott. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you very much. I'm doing great. I really appreciate the opportunity to visit with you.
Well, we are so glad to have you on the show today. Today we are going to be talking about sustainable agriculture and specifically kind of two different programs that are being developed in the United States and Europe. So to get started on a high note, can you tell me more about sustainable agriculture in general, both in some of the advances and success stories that we've had since we kind of started down this path, as well as why it's so important that we keep going down that path?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And first, let me just also say how much I appreciated and was honored to have the opportunity to address the societies at their recent annual meeting that was virtual. I really an honor to have had that opportunity. Well, sustainable agriculture is not a new term. It's not a new topic. It's something that really has been around for a long time, but it often has been, I think, positioned or misplaced or perhaps not fully understood. And one of the things I'd like to do is really just indicate that, sustainable agriculture really has three very important components, all three of which have to be met. First of all, practices and activities related to sustainable agriculture have to be economically sustainable. Farming is a business enterprise, and farmers need to be able to be successful as business people. And so it's important that whatever systems are designed represent and respect that economic viability. Second, a social responsibility. We're all in this to make sure that we can develop safe, affordable food. And so if systems don't do that, if they don't make that food available and affordable, then it's not truly sustainable either. And third, of course, one area that does get perhaps all of the attention at times, but certainly is a very valid one, is the environmental sustainability. I like to also refer to this as kind of the production and production capability. We need to be able to produce on farmland. We need to be able to produce more in perpetuity each and every year, but we need to do it in a way that respects the fact that the soil, the air, and the water need to have the capabilities to continue to have that production. So it's the balance of PPC, production capability, that represents the broad basis of sustainable agriculture.
Excellent. That is a wonderful overview. And so today we're looking at two different programs, like I mentioned before. So we're just going to kind of do a side-by-side analysis of what they're both aiming to do here. And we'll start with the Agriculture Innovation Agenda, which is here in the U.S. So can you start off by telling me just kind of the origin story of this program? Why was it decided that we needed this program, and how did we start pulling it all together?
Sure. Well, it's a great story, and it's one I'm very proud to have been a part of, as has all of USDA. And in fact, well, I'll start by saying that, USDA really has stepped up here to be able to establish some very large and bold goals for U.S. agriculture, and so bold that we really cannot address these in just the conventional way of thinking. But let me back up for a minute and say, one of the things that we recognized early on is that we have 8 missionaries here at USDA, and they all individually do fantastic work. But what we recognize is that if we all work together and we all focus on ensuring that, for example, our mission area, research, education, economics, is really focused on developing the solutions that our farm and conservation system mission area needs, then we will have a much bigger impact overall. So some of these early discussions are really all about how can we work together to focus the research to ensure that our programs are impactful and that they have that impact that we talked about with economic, social, and environmental. And that led us to a broader discussion about, we really need to set a big goal in that context. And Secretary Perdue, of course, was all over that and is a huge advocate for innovation. And he said, let's set a goal to increase production and productivity by 40%, while at the same time reduce an environmental footprint by 50% by the year 2050. Again, such a magnitude that we can't just think about an incremental approach. We really need to get our heads wrapped around transformational innovations and changes, and innovation is really at the center of this. And what I'd say too, Abby, is that, we have a great starting point. The United States has had a tremendous track record of innovation and productivity. And in fact, over the last 90 years, productivity has increased over 400%. What's amazing about that is that the level of inputs for that same level, for that 400% increase in output, has fundamentally stayed the same in the aggregate. Now, the type of inputs, the amount of inputs, the germplasm, all the things that are leading to this increased productivity have changed, but the aggregate amount of inputs have fundamentally been the same. That's just an amazing success story, not one that I think any other industry in the world could match. So we start from a position of strength and a legacy and a strong track record. And if you just think about what some of those examples are that have allowed us to do that, that would be very familiar, I think, to your members. Herbicide-tolerant crops has the PPC balance, right? It has the productivity that's allowed us to reduce complexity, improve scale, but at the same time, it's also enabled us the opportunity to have reduced till and no-till and reduce the environmental footprint significantly. Insect-resistant crops, same kind of story. It's increased the productivity, it's reduced the uncertainty and the risk in insect control, but at the same time, it's reduced a lot of use of pesticides that might have been less effective or perhaps used and had some off-target impacts. And breeding, of course, is the great success story of agriculture, breeding for plants and animals in terms of our ability to maintain and adapt to all things in front of us. So that's all part of that track record that's been very successful. And so building on that track record, the Secretary outlined this goal that was referred to broadly as the Ag Innovation Agenda. And we laid out really 3 work streams that are part of that. One is a research work stream, and I'll say a little bit more about that. But the research work stream is all about building tools and capabilities for the future, those transformational technologies that I'd mentioned. And then another work stream is the program work stream, which is the notion of once we have these tools, let's put them to work. Let's put them in our programs for conservation that we have at USDA. Let's put them in our Farm Service Agency, our risk agency. Let's put them to work so that we have that impact. But let's be transparent and let's be objective. And the third work stream is all about the metrics and the goals and making sure that we know what we're measuring. When we say reduce environmental footprint by 50%, what does that mean and how are we going to measure it? So those 3 work streams have been at it for the last 10 months, just now coming to really some key milestones where we're publishing and putting together the outcomes of that. And in the case of the research work stream, which we've had the honor of leading here within this mission area, we actually expect to publish that here in the very first part of January. And so what does that include? That includes the notion of exploring what the big areas of innovation are, and then getting the voice of the customer. So we leveraged and utilized a recent National Academies of Sciences report that identified a number of very important breakthroughs that are here and on the horizon that will impact agriculture and food systems. Very briefly, those are genome design, which of course includes gene editing, but really much more than that, all the other tools and techniques that allow us to accelerate the great progress we've had in breeding. Digital and automation. And yes, we recognize that digital is part of agriculture now, but really we have just touched the surface on that. And automation, that's much more than self-driving tractors. That includes automated food processing plants. It includes automation in all kinds of mechanisms and aspects, harvesting and the rest of it, and specialty crops as an example. A third area is really prescriptive intervention, which is the notion of utilizing tools like artificial intelligence and machine learning that allows us to make on-the-fly decisions with that digital information and to be very, very precise. And the fourth is really a systems management paradigm, which says, there is so much complexity. And in the past, honestly, we have worked with our innovations to avoid or minimize complexity. But now we can embrace it. Now we have the capabilities to embrace that complexity, to have that true precision agriculture that allows us to manage that and take us to the next place. It will still be a simple and less complex interface for the farmers and the ranchers and so forth. All the work will be done behind the scenes with those other tools, and so we can get the benefits of both. So those are the four areas. And then we spent really a considerable amount of time working to develop a request for information. And we had that out there to all of the public and encourage folks to contribute and said, look, what are the biggest opportunities to help us address this 40% and this 50%? And we wanted to hear from farmers, ranchers, foresters. We wanted to hear from anyone, but we really wanted that voice of the customer to give us those insights. And were we delighted with the response that we got? Not just the volume of response, but the quality of those responses. And the societies contributed tremendously to that. Lots of groups contributed to it. And so we really came out with a very rich view of what the opportunities are. And what a lot of those applications of those four innovation clusters could be against those opportunities. And so we've been sorting to put that together, and that will represent really the report that is the U.S. Ag Innovation Strategy, which again is one component of the Ag Innovation Agenda. And what we endeavor to do is identify some discovery goals. That would say, you know what, if we can do this, this is going to have a big impact. It's validated by the customer because that's why we did the RFI, and it should now steer and direct our research efforts in the public sector, which it will, but it will also inform the private sector so they can be looking at, you know what, if that's what is really going to make the impact, we have some technologies or we have some ideas on how we can advance that as well. So the goal is really to align the arrows, simply said, of the public sector and the private sector on the biggest discovery goals that would have the biggest impact to address this goal of the 40% and the 50%. And we're very, very pleased at where we are now. Now, I'll say up front, it's an evergreen process. Innovation goes on forever and needs change forever. And so what we have is a starting point. In some areas and commodities, we don't have as much information as we would like, so we'll need to continue to augment that. But we have a super starting point to help direct our programs here in USDA through NIFA, through the ARS, through our mechanisms, and also to inform the private sector. So we're really proud about the outcome on that.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm so floored by this because, I mean, there's such huge goals and just such a huge program to coordinate everything together. So I'm very impressed by this whole operation. And there's another facet that I wanted to bring into this discussion. We've already covered, obviously, a lot of kind of the goals itself and how you were hoping to go about that. But you also have this kind of partnership program initiative called the USDA Science Blueprint. So can you talk about that a little bit, kind of how that partnership hopes to support this program and help you guys reach these really bold goals?
Absolutely. And really the USDA Science Blueprint and the Ag Innovation Agenda go hand in hand. And so what's the difference? Well, the USDA Science Blueprint really represents the capabilities that we need to have that can support all of those things I just outlined to support those discovery goals. What are the areas of focus in the next era of agriculture? And so working with the leadership team here at RE, we spent a lot of time early on thinking about, look, we all have our individual roles and responsibilities, and we have, some things that we do year in and year out. But when we look across our agencies, what do we see as the things where we can have a unique impact on, and the things that will in fact have a big impact on U.S. agriculture in that next era? And through a long facilitated but very constructive process, we identified really 5 themes. And we wanted to put these out there because we really do believe that these are going to set the stage and enable us, if we build these capabilities and we develop expertise here, to actually achieve those discovery goals that are coming from the Ag Innovation Strategy. What are those themes? One is sustainable ag intensification. And none of these words are going to be new words or new things to anybody. But if you start to think about putting a critical mass of focus on it, it really starts to provide that kind of priority setting activity. So sustainable ag intensification, honestly, is all about doing more with less. It is that continual journey of productivity. It is that PPC balance. But it really needs to have an over focus on some of the things where we need to ensure that we're successful, such as soil health. We really need to understand the soil health components. We need to make sure that we understand how to best deal with invasive species and the kinds of things that ultimately will affect productivity and limit us from having that intensification. If we can do more with less land, let's say, that gives us the opportunity to put more land into conservation. It gives us the opportunity really to have a significant impact on mitigating climate changes. It gives us an opportunity really to strengthen the health of our soil and build up that production capability. And if there's one thing I would say along these lines as well to kind of tie this together, we've had so many fantastic innovations that in large part have been aligned with the production side of things. They have had some impacts on the production capability, but what we have now is opportunity to use science and technology more to deal with the production capability side as a primary focus. And so all those innovation areas I talked about fall within the sustainable ag intensification area. A second theme is climate adaptation. And while we certainly plan and hope and absolutely expect to have the opportunity to mitigate climate changes, we believe it's our responsibility at USDA to ensure U.S. agriculture is prepared to adapt. And annual crops, have the opportunity to breed on an annual basis, and they'll be able to have that. But, we have a lot of perennial crops. We have a lot of specialty crops. We have a lot of animal species that don't have that kind of a one-year cycle. So we need to make sure that we're looking forward and building in breeding goals, discovery goals, and so forth, and have the capability to be able to adapt for U.S. agriculture to climate changes, whatever magnitude that turns out to be based on what we're able to mitigate. A third one is a little bit outside the norm of production agriculture, but it's food and nutrition translation. And, that, of course, includes food safety, but it also includes this really emerging concept of precision nutrition, which is very exciting to me. It's the notion of really being able to combine and understand from your individual DNA what you might be susceptible to or what have you from a chronic disease standpoint based on your own heredity and genetics. And so now we are able to, with converging sciences, to be able to better understand how to prescribe a diet that meets your individual situation versus kind of a generic population-based set of diet. It's not here today, but I really think this is going to be the next area of major breakthroughs. And then value-added innovations, and there's no shortage of opportunity for us to continually improve our biofuel capabilities, our opportunity to develop value-added innovations to address food loss and waste. And the USDA Agriculture Research Service and NIFA, really all of our agencies are always in that mode. And the last one is really a little bit different, is ag science policy leadership. And what this says is everything we do at USDA and everything we would expect everyone around the world to do should be based on good ag science policy. And so evidence-based, decisions-based, repeatable science, the kinds of things where we can really ensure that we're using the best knowledge that we have at the time to make good decisions and policies.
Hey science fans, I hope you're enjoying the show. Interested in learning more? Scott's article, Sustainable Agriculture in the US versus the EU, a comparative look at different approaches to similar objectives, published in CSA News, will be freely available until March 15th, 2021. Scott was also the keynote speaker at the Society's 2020 virtual annual meeting. You can still register for the annual meeting to view Scott's keynote. We offer both a free registration, which includes Scott's keynote, and a full registration, which includes Scott's keynote as well as access to thousands of other sessions, posters, and more. Digital access will be available through February 13th. We'll include links to all these resources in our show notes. Let's get back to the show. Wow, those are incredible areas of focus and research. I'm sure we could do many a podcast on each one of those, and hopefully we'll be able to have some of your researchers on our show in future to talk about what they're doing related to this. But we do also want to talk about this other program, which is currently being developed in the European Union, and that is the Farm to Fork strategy. So moving on, can we talk about these programs both seem to have kind of risen up around the same time. So can you tell us kind of how this strategy was developed, some of its goals and strategies, and how it hopes to attain those?
Sure. And, first of all, let me just say that what we described as the Ag Innovation Agenda is really our play, and it's our focus towards accomplishing a lot of the same goals that the European Union has espoused with their Farm to Fork program. And, we have so much in common in terms of what we hope to achieve between the two groups. And I want to just be clear about that. But I also be clear and say we're taking really radically different approaches to it. What's been published by and advocated by the European Union in terms of their Farm to Fork focus is really all about the environmental side of that sustainability model. And that's not a bad thing. We all need to focus on the environmental component of it. But how we go about doing that is truly critical. And so, whereas I described we've developed a set of discovery goals, we're really putting our emphasis, our focus, and our energy on developing new tools and new techniques, both incrementally better as well as transformationally different. The European Union, what they published, they're talking about reducing pesticide use by 50%, reducing fertilizer use by 20%, reducing antibiotics by a certain percent, and so forth and so on. That's not bad in and of itself, but you need to have a way to substitute for that. You need to put as much equal energy into creating new tools that can replace those tools. Farmers have to have tools. They absolutely have to have tools. And while we could argue, which tools are better than others and the rest of it, they all have their own life cycle. And so the goal here for the Ag Innovation Agenda is to move us to that next cycle. What we see from the Farm to Fork policy, it's all about removing the tools and relying on nature, if you will, to provide the focus there. And we just believe that leaves the farmers in Europe in a lurch. We believe it's not a transition plan. It's a plan of remove versus improve. And so we feel for the farmers. We believe farmers here and farmers all around the world are the stewards of their land, and that they're good stewards of their land. And we believe that they need to have the tools. They need to use them responsibly. But we have a responsibility to continually provide better tools and to provide the education and the extension and the counsel to allow them to understand and utilize those tools and the impact that they have. And so, we have a difference of opinion on how to approach this. We have a whole of society approach here with the Ag Innovation Agenda. We're trying to get the private sector deeply involved. We have our land grant university system, which is a phenomenal system that's focused on innovation, that's focused on research. The Farm to Fork program is one that I think is too narrow in focus and doesn't necessarily work in the best interest of the farmers who ultimately will be the ones that steward their land. We also, conducted, working with our trade group here, we conducted through the Economic Research Service a study on that to understand what the broader impact would be. And our study, which has been published and used a globally acceptable model in economics called the GTAP model, identified that the farm to fork policy will reduce farm income by over 15%. It'll have a significant reduction in productivity. But here's the most important, and when the EU can choose to take those things on, that's their choice. We're not trying to intervene in that. But here's another unanticipated consequence is that that program, if it's implemented, will actually increase food insecurity by 22 million people. Not in Europe, but in their surrounding countries, the countries who rely on that, the countries who rely on the output with the reduced productivity and the rest of it. So these are consequential outcomes, and we need to make sure as a global community that we're doing the right thing for the production to feed people, as well as to ensure that we have the stewardship of the land and that we focus on the environmental piece. So from our standpoint, if you look at those three criteria for sustainability, the Ag Innovation Agenda is all focused on helping the farmers be more productive and profitable. It's highly focused on ensuring we have an available and an affordable food supply. And it's focused on the environmental impact, reducing by 50% with better tools. The Farm to Fork program, as we look at it, will have a significant negative impact on grower income. So that's one criteria that's not met. It will increase the price of food significantly and food insecurity. So it has a negative social impact. And a lot of the things that they're talking about doing in terms of removing and so forth doesn't really have a strong basis in science from an environmental standpoint. So it doesn't really pass our judgment of sustainable agriculture in that context. And so we would hope that we can work closely with the EU to develop positions where we have a respect for technology, where we have a common focus on helping to feed the world, two of the most agriculturally productive regions in the world, and that we can better support the mutual goals that we do in fact share.
Wow. Wow, that's a little troubling. But you did mention that we've obviously talked about some of the differences in the two programs, but you did mention opportunities to work together. And that was something I was hoping to talk about today is as far as like identifying gaps in research or ways that you can work together. Obviously, you've said that you both have goals that are very similar and maybe some strategies that come at it from multiple or different angles. So can you talk to me more about like what are the future opportunities moving forward for these programs as they're seeking to meet these global goals, really? How can they work together, complement each other? What are some of the opportunities there?
Well, absolutely. And, I think that a lot of these are going to be long-standing ones, but if we really need to recommit ourselves to see if we can solve these. And so, for example, we need to have a common framework on risk assessment, right? Because so much of our ability to produce sustainably is going to be dependent on technologies, not just the existing ones, but again, the future ones. And so we need to understand and we need to work together to identify a framework on how we can actually understand what the risk actually is versus the benefit and how we assess that so that we have that framework. There are some global programs like Codex and others that work in that direction and are helpful, but there are many others where we're far apart. And, we can be far apart on the social sides of things, but we have to align on science. That's got to be the one common thing that we share. And if we do that together, a lot of these kinds of differences and so forth will disappear, and we'll be able to utilize things that we can both agree on. The other thing is, I would say, and what I would love to see is if we could have in agriculture really a global ag innovation strategy. What I mean by that is where all the arrows are focused on how do we improve that economic, social, and environmental footprint together, embracing innovations that will do that. What I have found is that frequently groups are just anti-technology. Are not so much innovation, but just anti-technology. And so you have to find a way to do that. I'm not saying that's the case here, but where that exists, that really limits us from the ability to embrace sustainable intensification, as an example. We can do that with a lot of very positive and transformational technologies, particularly the ones that are on the horizon. The other thing we can do is share our experiences. We've got some tremendous experience with gene editing now, and we're seeing it in medical fields. We're seeing it now in ag fields. We have our own work to do here in terms of a regulatory process for some of these. But as that evolves, we can work with our colleagues in in Europe and all around the world to make sure that we align on some of those biggest solutions and discovery goals, many of which are going to be outlined within that ag innovation strategy that I already described. Increasing photosynthesis efficiency. We've got some great progress going on right now with that in the United States, but just imagine what would happen if we could increase the efficiency of photosynthesis by 10%, and what that would allow us to do in terms of reducing land use for crops or increasing productivity on the same land or however we choose to harvest that improvement. So it's not all about just improving yield. It's about using the tools we have to improve agriculture in multiple ways. And I know the EU, I've been there many, many times. I've worked with the folks. I know that they have great systems and great aspirations and ambitions. And I think there's a lot more we could do to work together to help solve not just our issues, but the issues of the world.
Yeah, totally. Collaboration is a huge thing on our show. We are super into that. Would love to hear further updates as those partnerships and relationships continue to develop in future. We've talked kind of about future research has kind of been the point of this. So we'll probably skip our usual what's the future research question here. And that really brings us down to our final three questions for you. Thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate you coming on. Being a keynote speaker at the meetings, of course, was huge. And to that end, the first of the questions is where people can go to learn more about both of these initiatives or the science behind them. Before you hop in, I will say that your keynote is still available. There's still time to register for our annual meeting, even though it happened in the past. It was all digital, so you have access to all the recordings if you still register through, I think, around mid-February. So you've still got time. So you can listen to Scott's keynote there. Scott, where else can people go?
There are a number of sources, and of course, the USDA is a public agency, and so everything that we do is, of course, publicly available. But, USDA.gov, you can search and find a lot of the things I've talked about here, including, the blueprint. You'll be able to go to USDA.gov/AIA, which is the Ag Innovation Agenda. We've actually developed an interactive dashboard that goes with that strategy, so you can mine that and understand, say, hey, you know what, I'm a corn grower and I'm looking at the transformative types of innovations down the road, and you can see specifically for that. We also have a Twitter handle at USDA Science, which we're proud of, and we put things out on a regular basis. And the science blueprints there as well. So we have a lot of things there. It's really a rich area. Our communications team here in RE just does a fantastic job of doing all we can to make sure our stakeholders, our partners, and the public at large understand and have access to what we're trying to accomplish here.
Wonderful. And what does RE stand for, just for anyone who's not familiar?
Yeah, sorry about that acronym. It's a government acronym situation, but REE stands for Research, Education, and Economics. And Abby, there are 8 mission areas within USDA, and we are one of those. And as you mentioned at the beginning, we have 4 agencies plus the Office of the Chief Scientist that make up this mission area. And we work very closely with the other 7. We refer to that process as what we call the mission-to-mission area focus, and where we want to make sure that we're providing the insights, the information, and the analysis that supports our nutrition team, that supports our conservation team, our food safety team. And so mission to mission has been a big area of emphasis for us to make sure that we're part of their process as well and informing them on the best science and the best policy. It goes back to that science policy theme that I made reference to earlier. But REE is Research, Education, and Economics.
Wonderful. We will include links to all of that information in the show notes. We will also have links for the farm to fork strategy, so you guys can check out that, compare the programs, and all of that good stuff. You also, I almost forgot to mention, we'll have a article coming out in CSA News. That's our members magazine. So we will have that as well. Second question for you is, if people have kind of done their initial research and now they want to take that next step up and say, I want to be involved in these issues, I want to get involved in either of these programs, what can they do to get involved?
Great question. First of all, most of the things we're working on, in fact, the 2 big ones, the Science Blueprint as well as the Ag Innovation Agenda, we're working very closely with the land grant universities as well on that. And you'll start to see some of the things I've talked about managed through the granting programs of NIFA and through the priorities of ARS. So I would say the best way to do and maybe contact the NIFA or the ARS national program leaders, understand a little bit about, because they've all been briefed and understand what this is about, and that they can be some good connection points for that directly. If you just want to learn broadly more about the programs and the rest of it, again, those sources that we talked about earlier would be a good place to get that general education. And we'll have some contact points on that as well for individuals to get them started.
Sure. And if you're not a researcher, if you're just a regular, everyday person like me, are there ways that they can get involved? You mentioned getting consumer feedback, or maybe they can support in some other way. Are there opportunities there?
Well, hey, that's a great question. And, what I'd say, and I probably should have said it earlier, is, what's interesting about agriculture is that, and I find fascinating, is that, there are no 2 acres that are the same. And in fact, even in the same acre in 2 different years is different. And so what I say often is that we need our farmers, our ranchers, our foresters to be citizen scientists. They need to explore and find their best value and their best approach to soil health, to regenerative agriculture, and whatever it might be. So in the farming community and so forth, that's important. And, the great service that the CCAs play, the Certified Crop Advisors, with our farmers and ranchers is invaluable. And so those are all critical touch points. For the general public, there's just a wealth of information on our website and things people to get connected with pollinators, with all kinds of areas associated with this. And as I said, I would follow up on those focal points. Our Office of the Chief Scientist just does a phenomenal job of outreach and communication and webinars and all these kinds of things. And so I would point people in that direction.
Wonderful. Those are great ideas as well. Shout out to our CCAs. We obviously love them dearly. Thanks for all you're doing. Thanks to Citizen Scientists. You guys rock. So final question then is, what is one fun fact that people would not know about you if all they had was your research or these talks, I guess?
Wow. Okay. All right. Well, I've had some hobbies for a period of time. I'll give you 2 quick ones. But in a period of my life when my children were in their early teens to late teens, I was women's girls and then women's fast pitch softball coach. And I used to be the commissioner in our local community. I had 450 girls playing softball, which was great. They all did fantastic. Sometimes the 900 parents that went with them were a challenge. But we loved doing that. We set up a very competitive travel program as well. But the other fun hobby, in fact, that I hope to do more of is motorcycle riding. My wife and I take long motorcycle tours every year and have really enjoyed that, and getting a chance to see the country and the great beauty that we have here. And honestly, I enjoy riding through the Midwest and seeing the corn or soybean fields as much as I enjoy riding through the mountains. It's just spectacular to get out and see this country.
Totally. I'm sure it must be very rewarding to see a lot of the land that you are working to help be productive and healthy. And what fun facts. So that's all the questions we have for you today. But we, again, just want to say thank you so much for taking the time, both to be the keynote and to be on our show today, writing that article. We really appreciate all of your time and hard work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to Field Lab Earth. You'll find links to today's resources in our show notes or on our website. If you have any questions, comments, or recommendations for show topics, please contact us at podcast@sciencesocieties.org or on Twitter @FieldLabEarth. If you'd like to hear more content like this, please subscribe, and don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, Stitcher, or anywhere else you find your podcasts if you like our show. We're also available on Lyceum, the world's first audio learning community, where you can join our discussion group and comment on each episode. This podcast is a joint production of the American Society of Agronomy, Crop Science Society of America, and Soil Science Society of America. Special thanks to Lobo Loco for the use of their song Spook Castle on the intro and outro of our show. Opinions and conclusions expressed by guests are their own and are not considered as those of the American Society of Agronomy, Crop Science Society of America, Soil Science Society of America, its staff, its members, or its advertisers.